Hello, in this video, we will begin to introduce exception handling and text I/O in chapter 12. Exceptions are runtime errors. Exception handling enables a program to deal with runtime errors and continue its normal execution. We already encountered exceptions when we write a program. When we use array, we may have array index out of bounds exception. When we use objects, we may get no point exception. All of this are the examples of runtime errors. They are exceptions. If we don't deal with the runtime errors, the program terminates. In this chapter, we'll learn the ways to deal with the runtime errors, to process runtime errors so the program can continue to execute. Let's look at an overview of this exception handling. So we're going to start with this example. Prompt the user to enter two integers and display this number 1 divided by number 2. So what happens if we enter?
The program starts the execution from the main method. The statement creates an object for performing counsel input and assigns the object to the reference variable named input. The statement displays a message to prompt the user for input. The statement reads an input for number 1. The statement reads an input 3 from the counsel and assign it to variable number 1. The statement reads an input for number 2.
I'm going to enter 0. See what happens with 3 divided by 0.
The statement reads an input 0 from the counsel and assign it to variable number 2. The statement throws an exception and the program terminates.
So here's the exception. It is this divided by 0. For the integer division, the divisor cannot be 0. In this case, number 2 is 0, so it threw this arithmetic exception. Now we can take care of it by using this if statement. Before we perform the division, we're going to check number 2. If number 2 is not 0, we're going to perform it. Otherwise, we're going to display this message, divisor cannot be 0. So if you have the code after the if statement, they can continue to execute. Let's look at another example here. Now, what happens if you have a method? In the method, you're going to perform integer division. If you have this if-else embedded in that method, see what happens here is this. So I'm going to have this, put this in method right here. So I'm going to invoke this quotient method with number 1 and number 2. So the quotient method is right here, is you check number 2. If it's 0, stop the program. Now this is a problem here. Divisor cannot be 0 and the program is terminated. And this is the main method. It invokes quotient. But now when you invoke the quotient, something happens, something's wrong, and now you have no control. That is the problem. So we would like to have the control back to the caller if the method encounters a problem. So for this to happen, now we're going to introduce exception handling. So what we're going to do is right here. We're going to have this quotient method we're going to check this number 2. If it's 0, now we're going to through this exception, its object, new arithmetic exception, creating this object through back to the caller. In the caller, we're going to put this try and catch block. So this is potentially going to be a problem. If the problem occurs, we're going to catch it. So this is going to be caught right here. So we're going to write this now. Let's see the animation.
The program starts the execution from the main method. The statement creates an object for performing counsel input and assigns the object to the reference variable named input. The statement displays a message to prompt the user for input. The statement reads an input for number 1.
I'm going to enter 9.
The statement reads an input 9 from the counsel and assigned it to variable number 1. The statement reads an input for number 2.
I'm going to enter 0.
The statement reads an input 0 from the counsel and assigned it to variable number 2. The statement invokes the quotient method. The arguments are passed to invoke the quotient method. The statement tests, number 2 is equal to 0. It is true in this case. The statement throws an exception.
Now, an exception is thrown back to the caller.
An exception is received from invoking the quotient method.
And thus now all the statements after this line is going to be skipped. So now you go straight to this catch to catch it.
The arithmetic exception is caught by the catch clause. The statement displays a message. The statement displays the result. The main method exits. The program is finished.
Now, if we enter number 2 is not a 0, go back to this quotient, you will get the return value, and for this division of this to integer. And now coming back here, this normal execution, there's no error. So this, after this try block is finished, and go to the next statement after this catch and try. So this, the code in the try is, if it happens, it's going to be caught. If it doesn't happen, everything is just normal. So this is what we're going to do in this chapter. We're going to introduce exception handling and using the try catch block, and we're going to see how we're going to write the code through exception and see how the exception is handled. All right, so let's look at another example. Is right here is writing this code. It's the, we're gonna have this input and continue input until the input is correct. So we're going to write this, put this into a try catch block. So try catch. And now we're going to catch this exception. It is the input mismatch exception. Input mismatch exception. So when you enter a number here, you have to enter integer. If you enter a non-integer input, you are going to get this input mismatch exception. That is thrown from this method, next int. So from here, now you get this message, try this input again, and using a correct input, you have to put an integer, and now we're gonna skip this line and go to this do again and prompt the user for enter another integer. So this is repeated until you have this continue input is false. By then, so you come to this y and that's a false. So this is over. So after this do while loop, you get a correct input. And this is how it works for this program. In Java, there are a lot of exception classes predefined. So this input mismatched exception, and there's other things like the arithmetic exception, no point exception, index out of bounds exception. So we'll look at all this in the next video. For now, that's all. See you on the next video.